46 years ago today, the SS Edmund Fitzgerald sank in Lake Superior. All 29 crew members aboard died.
You'd seen pictures of the Fitzgerald, but had no idea how intact it would be.
On November 10th, 1975, one of the largest ships ever to sail the Great Lakes vanished beneath the icy waters of Lake Superior. The SS Edmund Fitzgerald went down in a storm so powerful, it erased an entire crew in minutes. For decades, the wreck has remained untouched, sealed in darkness, pressure, and silence. But now, nearly 500 feet below the surface, an underwater drone is sent toward the ship's final resting place. As its cameras cut through the black water, something appears on the screen. Something no one was prepared to see. And what this drone captures doesn't just raise questions about how the Edmund Fitzgerald sank. It leaves the world asking whether some shipwrecks were never meant to be disturbed. Subscribe now, because curiosity leads to discovery. A ship built for glory. In 1958, when the SS Edmund Fitzgerald slid into the waters from the shipyards of River Rouge, Michigan, she was not just a freighter. She was a floating marvel. At 729 feet long, she was the largest vessel ever built to navigate the Great Lakes at the time. Her purpose was simple: to transport vast quantities of taconite iron ore from the mines near Duluth, Minnesota, to industrial hubs like Detroit and Toledo. But the ship quickly became more than a workhorse. She became a symbol. Commissioned by the Northwestern Mutual Life Insurance Company and constructed by Great Lakes Engineering Works, the Fitzgerald was named after the company's chairman, Edmund Fitzgerald, a man who took personal pride in her completion. The ship's sleek white superstructure, gleaming burgundy hull, and unique proportions turned heads. Even those unfamiliar with the shipping industry could recognize her elegance and strength. From the beginning of her maiden voyages in 1958 to the end, slightly over 700 crossings in 1975, the Fitzgerald could boast of countless voyages across the Great Lakes. The ship was a giant in itself, loading over 26,000 tons of ore per trip and gaining respect, on some days, for her speed that broke records. Among the crews, she was referred to fondly by the name the pride of the American side. To those catching glimpses from the shores and bridges, she became a legend with grace in motion. It was not just her size or beauty that made her iconic. It was really the bond between the crew and the ship. The love for the Fitzgerald engendered intense loyalty. Many of her sailors served on her for years. Captain Ernest McSorley, later to command her on her last voyage, was one of the most seasoned men on the Great Lakes. He believed in the Fitzgerald. He trusted her strength, and so did his men. Fair-weather sailings were occasions when the Fitzgerald might be seen gliding under the Mackinac Bridge. Perhaps the sight was breathtaking enough to stir the aesthetic sensibilities of onlookers observing such passes. Whole families would turn out and join in the spectacle, her horn echoing like a ghostly call. Children in port towns knew her name. Tourists took pictures. Was it not Gordon Lightfoot who would later immortalize her in song? But it was not all glamour. Beneath those days lay the rigors of work. The Great Lakes are not easy on ships. Weather might change with little notice. Ice, fog, and storms were forever their challenging companions. But for 17 years, the Fitzgerald carried on, appearing to brush aside the fury of the lake. A steel titan confronting everything from storm to sun, she seemed invincible. By 1970, the Fitzgerald stood among the most respected freighters afloat. She had never suffered a major mishap. No one had ever lost life in her service. She was a seasoned sailor of open waters. Her reputation was firmly intact. She was viewed as unsinkable by many, a phrase that history has rarely treated kindly. When she carried iron ore pellets and sailed for Detroit on the night of November 9, 1975, expecting arrival late the following morning, everyone would have bet their final dollar that nothing would go wrong. The Arthur M. Anderson, moving along a nearby route, had fallen behind the Fitzgerald. Both vessels were known to have shared the lakes before. Poor weather was approaching, yet in both crews' minds, hope remained. On the surface, it appeared like another voyage, another cargo, another storm. Yet unknown to either ship, Lake Superior's forces were beginning one of the fiercest outbursts ever recorded, one that would challenge the Fitzgerald's pride and strength. And straight into it, she sailed. When she departed on November 9, 1975, no one could have imagined it would be her final journey, or that she would become an emblem of maritime tragedy, vanished in silence. On the morning of November 10, 1975, the SS Edmund Fitzgerald pressed forward through worsening weather, intent on reaching safety. Captain Ernest McSorley, experienced and composed, stayed in steady radio contact with the nearby freighter Arthur M. Anderson, which followed the Fitzgerald on radar from several miles away. The two ships navigated Lake Superior's violent waters together, staying close for shared awareness as the storm intensified each hour. What began as an ordinary November squall had become monstrous. Winds blasted beyond 70 miles per hour, and waves climbed higher than 25 feet, striking the freighters from every direction. Ice pellets lashed through the air. Visibility was disappearing. Forecasts had underestimated the system, and now both ships were trapped inside a maritime nightmare. By afternoon, the Fitzgerald was faltering. Around 3:30 p.m., Captain McSorley radioed the Anderson with a concerning update. "We have a bad list. Lost an event. One of the hatch covers is giving us trouble." Even so, McSorley sounded calm. He stressed that the situation remained under control. His tone stayed steady, his voice even, though the storm showed no mercy. It was 19:10 hours when the final transmission from the Fitzgerald came through. McSorley spoke over the radio. "We are holding our own." Nothing more. There was no hint of fear in his voice, no trace of panic. Then silence followed. Moments later, the Anderson's radar screen showed an empty space. The once powerful freighter, only minutes earlier cutting through the storm, vanished completely from radar. Not a single distress flare was fired. No mayday call was sent. No debris appeared. The ship and all 29 men aboard simply disappeared. The Coast Guard was notified at once, and a large-scale search effort on Lake Superior began. Aircraft, helicopters, and ships swept the lake for any trace of survivors, lifeboats, or evidence explaining the Fitzgerald's fate. There was nothing, only scattered pieces of debris. Some oil slicks suggested that something catastrophic truly had taken place. Eventually, the wreck was located, broken in two, 530 feet below, hauntingly still on the lake floor. The bow section rested upright in the sediment. The mangled stern lay inverted a short distance away. Yet, simply knowing the wreck had been found only created more questions than answers. The Fitzgerald had sunk so abruptly. The crew had no time to call for help. How could a ship that had endured hundreds of voyages fail within just minutes? Theories ranged from rogue waves, known to overwhelm even the strongest ships, to faulty soundings or shoalings that may have caused severe hull damage. Others argued structural failure, claiming the ship's backbone had weakened after years of hard service in rough waters. But none of these ideas were supported by solid evidence. No bodies were recovered. There were no black boxes, and there were no survivors. The silence of her final moments became part of the Fitzgerald's legend. It was not only that she sank, but how she vanished suddenly, without warning, without a call for help, and without visible proof explaining her end. For the families of the 29 crewmen, the silence was overwhelming. No final words, no farewell, only a ship slipping beneath the waves without leaving a trace. Years blurred together. Investigations continued, but the central mystery endured. How did one of the largest and most powerful ships on the Great Lakes disappear so quickly and so quietly? Not anymore. Nearly 50 years later, technology would descend back into the depths. And what underwater drones uncovered beneath Lake Superior's icy black waters would send chills across the world. The haunting silence surrounding her loss would linger with investigators for decades, theories, and a 50-year debate. In the days and months after the Edmund Fitzgerald's tragic sinking, the Great Lakes shipping community, grieving families, government agencies, and maritime specialists searched desperately for answers. But the ship had gone down without a distress call, without eyewitnesses, and without survivors. What followed became more than a search for truth. It turned into a decades-long battle over responsibility, technology, and the fragile line between accident and negligence. The United States Coast Guard led the first investigation. In 1977, its report concluded that the most likely cause was flooding in the forward cargo holds through hatch covers that were damaged or improperly secured. According to this explanation, the cargo hatches sealing thousands of tons of iron ore pellets may have failed under wave pressure, allowing water to gradually collect inside the ship. It was a straightforward yet devastating idea. A minor failure repeated and overlooked until it became fatal. The families of the crew reacted strongly against this conclusion. It placed heavy emphasis on human error and struck a deep emotional chord. The Coast Guard's findings appeared to place blame on the men aboard. Captain McSorley was widely regarded as a skilled mariner with sound judgment in dangerous conditions. The crew had no opportunity to defend themselves, and implying they failed to secure basic clamps and covers felt like a betrayal. In a competing theory, the NTSB proposed that the Fitzgerald may have suffered a catastrophic structural failure, possibly breaking apart while still afloat. Potential triggering factors included stress fractures, metal fatigue, and the extreme strain placed on the ship. The NTSB argued that even a fully seaworthy vessel could fail under such savage weather conditions, particularly if any element of its structural strength had already been weakened. Others offered their own explanations, including a widely held belief that the Fitzgerald struck an uncharted shoal, or even an underwater reef, damaging its hull, a theory not entirely unreasonable. The ship was navigating in near-zero visibility, and portions of Lake Superior's bottom were poorly charted during the 1970s. Some suggested a rogue wave, a towering wall of water perhaps 35 feet high, may have slammed into the ship in one massive, overpowering blow, driving it down instantly. With so many theories and so little concrete evidence, the truth stayed out of reach. During the 1980s and 1990s, only a handful of submersible dives were conducted to document the wreck. At the time, technology lacked the ability to capture high-resolution imagery. Early side-scan sonar produced only crude shapes. Video footage was grainy and limited in detail. The ship's two main sections, the bow and the stern, were charted, but many critical areas went unexplored. Aside from missing hatch clamps, torn vents, wrinkled vent membranes, and frayed steel beams, little else could be observed. The deeper forensic narrative remained locked within the cold depths. This uncertainty clouded the truth for many years. Historians, naval engineers, maritime unions, and families alternated between differing, often emotionally charged interpretations of the wreck, which had become more than a sunken ship, but a symbol of pride, loss, and unresolved questions. Over time, however, it became evident that speculation or outdated charts would not reveal the truth behind the Fitzgerald's final moments. New perspectives, improved tools, and a willingness to let the wreck itself, not legends, tell the story were needed. In 2023, underwater engineering teams, AI-supported researchers, and marine historians set out to do exactly that. Armed with modern drones, sonar systems, and 4K cameras, they arrived not merely to revisit the wreck, but to bring resolution to the long-standing debate. Technology was finally ready to meet the questions that had lingered unanswered. A drone dive into darkness began before sunrise as the research vessel hovered over a GPS-locked position on Lake Superior's frozen surface, the known resting place of the Edmund Fitzgerald. Nearly 50 years had passed since the freighter disappeared, yet the wreck lay untouched, resting 530 feet below in dark, near-freezing water. Now, equipped with advanced underwater drone technology, a new generation of investigators prepared to descend once again. The remotely operated vehicle, or ROV, was unlike anything deployed in earlier missions. Fitted with 6 powerful floodlights, 4K resolution cameras, sophisticated sonar, and AI-assisted scanning systems, the drone was designed not just for exploration, but for accuracy. Engineers described it as surgical, able to maneuver delicate wreck sites without disturbing their structure. Its thrusters were tuned for ultra-slow, silent movement. Its manipulators could recover objects no larger than a coin. Most importantly, it could create detailed 3D digital models of everything it encountered in real time. As the ROV slid into the water, the surface appeared misleadingly calm, strangely quiet compared to the roaring storm that had claimed the Fitzgerald decades before. The drone descended slowly, its tether paying out as lights sliced through heavy sediment hanging in the depths. Inside the ship, control room monitors flickered to life, showing cloudy water and ghost-like shapes that gradually resolved into darker forms. Then, structure emerged. A massive steel shape rose from the darkness. "There she is," someone whispered. The bow of the Edmund Fitzgerald stood hauntingly upright in the gloom, buried deep within the lake bed. The red-toned hull, muted by rust, towered like a cathedral wall. Decades of sediment blanketed every surface. Fish drifted across the screen, moving slowly in the cold. The drone circled carefully, revealing torn cargo hatches and a battered superstructure. The stern section, flipped and twisted, lay not far away. But what stunned the team was not the wreck's violence. It was the stillness and calm of it all. There were no signs of explosion, no evidence of collision or fire on the exterior hull. The wreck looked like something that had settled gently onto the lake floor after almost peacefully stopping, and that detail was deeply troubling. Somewhere in that silence was the story of how 29 men vanished. Beginning with a precise drone survey of the hull, the team focused on the starboard side and moved forward along the deck. The images they recorded were extraordinary. Millimeter-level clarity and complete darkness revealed every rivet, every tear, every flake of paint. And then came an unexpected moment. One engineer leaned closer to examine the forward cargo hatch. "Back it up 3 feet," she said quietly. The drone operator complied. What appeared next on the screen brought the room to silence. A clamp was missing. The heavy steel clamps, 22 on each hatch, were designed to keep the covers sealed even in the fiercest storms. These were not minor parts. They were essential structural components critical to the ship's safety. If they were gone, waves could force the hatch covers open, allowing water to pour straight into the cargo hold. This clamp had not simply corroded, it was completely gone. Then the cameras revealed something else that would alter the entire investigation. More missing clamps and a wide opening in the deck. Evidence that changed everything. As the drone continued its slow, deliberate pass over the wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald, the true significance of its discoveries became clear. What had begun as a structural inspection turned into something far deeper. A forensic examination of one of maritime history's most haunting losses. And what it revealed reshaped everything people believed they understood. The missing clamp on the forward hatch had already unsettled the team. But as the ROV moved to the second and third hatches, a clear pattern emerged that could not be dismissed. Once again, the drone's lights exposed clamps that were bent, damaged, or entirely missing. The very mechanisms meant to secure more than 26,000 tons of iron ore pellets. In some areas, clamps appeared to have been violently ripped away. Others were bent backward, as if subjected to relentless, punishing stress. This was not a single-point failure. It was extensive. Even the skeptics on board could no longer argue these were isolated or hypothetical issues. They were undeniable, visible, measurable, and recorded. Then came another devastating find. The air vent pipe on the forward hatch had been completely torn off at its base. What remained was an open steel ring leading straight into the cargo hold. This was not gradual corrosion. The pipe looked as though it had been violently removed, struck repeatedly by waves crashing over the bow. What once allowed airflow during loading operations had turned into a direct channel for icy lake water. One structural engineer put it simply, "That's a 4-inch open hole straight into the ship's lungs." Missing hatch clamps and a shattered vent pointed to a terrifying conclusion. In waves topping 25 feet, with winds howling near 70 miles per hour, the Fitzgerald was not just fighting the storm, it was taking on water at a rate the crew likely never realized. When investigators reviewed the Coast Guard radio recordings, Captain McSorley's final transmission to the Arthur M. Anderson took on a heartbreaking new meaning. He spoke of a bad list and something lost, yet said the ship was holding her own. In light of the drone evidence, it became painfully clear that McSorley may not have known how quickly conditions were worsening below deck. Simulations run by the investigative team revealed a chilling scenario. Water could have been pouring into the cargo hold at more than 4,000 gallons per minute through the destroyed vent and damaged hatches. At that rate, even a ship as large as the Fitzgerald would become critically unstable in less than 30 minutes. The evidence was undeniable. This was no longer a theory about weak hatch covers. It was confirmation, captured frame by frame. Ultra HD footage showed hatch edges in millimeter detail, while sediment patterns revealed both the direction and persistence of water flow. Analysts identified sediment trails inside the hatch coamings, clear proof that water had actively surged through the seals before the ship finally sank. Then came an even more troubling discovery. Some of the clamps appeared to have been modified or replaced during the ship's 17 years in service. They were not original parts. This raised serious concerns about maintenance and inspection practices in the years before the sinking. If earlier crews had noticed problems and attempted fixes, it suggested a known history of stress on the hatch hardware, a history that may have been ignored, minimized, or overlooked. Silent flooding may have sealed the ship's fate long before anyone realized it was sinking.